Well, good morning. Glutton for punishment? Well, you tell me, I guess. I wanted to make the case today for the proliferation of the modern electric vehicle as simply just another sort of example of rank consumerism. And bear with me, this isn't really an anti-EV rant. So, as the kids say these days, don't get it twisted. But I think I've got a good argument for this, and I think it's kind of a no-brainer, really, if you just look at things. Well, hello everyone, Future Mike here. This gives you a little bit of a glimpse into my video production system. I've got many such videos that I've recorded over time and have never uploaded. This is one such video, but I thought I'd go ahead and upload it because I think it's still, I think I've got some important points to make in there. And as I just said, it's not an anti-EV rant, but I think all of this stuff is pretty readily apparent with just a little bit of observation, and in particular, observation of the narrative of why we're doing this in the first place. So I might intervene a couple of times. Other than that, thanks for watching. And we'll leave aside all of the obvious issues as well. The environmental impact of the manufacture of the batteries themselves, the fact that we've got to mine all these rare earth minerals, and generally speaking, they're coming from countries that probably don't have a lot of regulations, and let's just say that the labor is probably not unionized, and things like that, right? If you want to talk about humanitarian issues. We'll leave aside for the moment the fact that there isn't currently any kind of a good recycling regime for these battery packs when they reach the end of their service life. We'll leave aside for the moment that these vehicles are much heavier than their normal internal combustion counterparts, and so the weight of the average vehicle is increasing, not decreasing. Of course, that's been happening in the light duty trucks for quite a while, right? Like an F-350 ain't what it used to be. Let's just say that, and I can tell you from lifting them on the hoist, these things are heavy, heavy beasts. But now it's happening with all the cars as well, right? Because everybody's being encouraged to switch, and they are heavier. And that there's several factors there, one of which is just the weight of the batteries themselves. And the other factor is the argument I'm making. So we'll sort of see that as this plays out. We'll leave aside for the moment the not only the impact to the roads, which is a cost and potentially a source of a type of emissions, and then there's the actual increased tire wear of these heavier vehicles. So then you have what's probably like the redheaded stepchild of pollutants. Nobody really discusses it, but the rubber particulate emissions from EVs is actually substantial. And so there's that to consider. We'll leave aside for the moment that in the vast majority of places, these vehicles are not an alternative to combustion vehicles. They've actually just moved the combustion off site, right? They are external combustion vehicles in most places. And then we'll also leave aside for the moment the potential for increased threat due to fire. And I know there's going to be lots of people who say, internal combustion vehicles catch fire more often, et cetera, et cetera. That may or may not be true. But you have to also look at what the cause of the fire is, because if you look at an internal combustion vehicle, they rarely catch on fire because of the fuel, right? Generally speaking, a lot of them are electrical fires, which obviously can happen in an EV. And a lot of it sometimes has to do with complexity, poor engineering, accidents, of course, and other things. But regardless, even if internal combustion vehicles were more likely to catch fire, the severity and the toxic emissions from an EV and the difficulty of putting the EV fire out far outweigh. And if you think you've got a good argument, I would invite you not to argue with me. I would invite you to argue with an actuary, right? Because the insurance companies are taking notice. I think it won't be long before you'll see charging stations in the bottom floor of an apartment building or hospital, school, something like that. Just won't be allowed. I mean, it might not even be against your insurance. It might be just outlawed outright, unless and until they can fix that problem. Incidentally, as a mechanic, I've watched lots of fire departments and large ones, right, that have the resources to do some kind of research, so to speak, and try to develop different kinds of blankets you can put over a vehicle different kinds of hose nozzles that they can use to attempt to flood the battery compartment. And I thought, this isn't a hard problem to solve if that's what you're after, right? As a mechanic, it just seems to me obvious. And I'm not a big government guy, but if they can mandate emissions and other things, if you can mandate the production of electric vehicles in the first place, right? Then you should be able to mandate a universal connection point and dispersal unit on every EV, on the battery pack, that contains a tube that runs from a universal location on every car, so that fire departments never need to guess, oh, I thought this was a Toyota, it's a Chevy, they're over here, while everyone's dying or the vehicle's about to explode, right? Once upon a time, most American cars anyway, had a hinging license plate door, and that's where your fuel cap was. That'd be a nice place to revisit for a universal spigot or spout, say a dry brake maybe, because obviously whatever it is, would have to be well sealed to the environment, would have to be somewhat tamper proof, for people with ill will, let's say, and would need to be easily accessible to the fire department. So this would be a great standardized location. And, you could have maybe a little bit of a labyrinthian tube leading from there to the top of the battery pack. But I think you could get it done. And I think you could standardize that across vehicles. You would have a dry brake attachment for the fire hoses that they would basically just clip that on, pull down the license plate, jam that thing in, pop open the dry brake. If you don't know what a dry brake is, have a look. You could look at either mid-flight refueling for airplanes, or even easier is just NASCAR. They sort of adopted a version of a dry brake, and that would be a direct port to funnel high flow of water to cool down the battery pack, which the thermal runaway, the thermal is the key to the thermal runaway, right? Whatever the flaw is, it starts the increase in temperature. That's its own thing. But once it develops thermal runaway, of course, that's when it starts to involve adjacent cells. And that's when it becomes a very serious danger. And the toxins are unbelievable. So I'm leaving aside all that stuff, right? My point is that if this were really about the environment, then you would not see the type of EVs that you see and the type of advertisements. I think for most people, it does start in a genuine way. I have many customers who said to me, we're thinking we should probably get an electric vehicle for the environment to do our part. And to start off with, I think that's a bit of a misnomer. I think that it's a mistake because they never factor in, all the things I just mentioned, but even just the environmental impact of the manufacture of the vehicle in the first place. You've got a perfectly viable car here with good maintenance. It's going to last another 20 years. A lot of them were recent purchases too. Buy a 2016 Subaru Crosstrek in 2020, 2021. The car's barely broken in. And they're already thinking of getting an EV, not because they need another car, but because they think it would be better for the environment. And I explained to them, I'm not sure it's environmentally sound to have a whole nother car manufactured for you. So far, none of them have done it, but, and arguably, this was not for my own benefit, as a repairer, because I knew I was going to retire, right? I just don't see the point in it. But I do think that most people who buy an EV, that's how they get into it. They think it's the better option. It's better for the environment. They want to do their part. But then they get lured in by the advertisements. And the advertisements are all, like these cars are all upscale to a large degree. They have all these advertisements emphasizing performance, emphasizing luxury, emphasizing creature comforts. And these are all necessarily heavy vehicles. Every creature comfort, every convenience you add to a vehicle adds to its weight. Every bit you add to the weight adds to its environmental impact. That's just how this works. So you've got advertisements of little old ladies pining away after their one Volkswagen and going to the dealership and smoking the tires and doing donuts in the parking lot, terrifying the sales manager in the passenger seat, right? Or you've got, Elon Musk bragging that the Cybertruck can out-accelerate a Porsche while towing a Porsche. That's all environmental impact, and it's not just environmental impact in the moment when you're putting your foot to the floor. These all require more powerful motors and definitely necessarily larger battery packs and infrastructure to flow the current that's required to operate those motors like that, right? Or you've got the, I think it's a Kia ad. It's kind of an electric blue SUV towing this, what looks to be like, maybe it's a manufactured home, I don't know, but it's like it's an RV, like something on the lines of 20 foot long, but it's all wood clad and it's kind of almost got a pitched roof on it. And and it's got like this big slide out wooden hot tub, and the hot tub's plugged into the EV, and he's sitting kind of on a mountaintop, right? This is how we appeal to people. Future Mike again here. Yeah, and I should have mentioned, of course, the modes too, right? Like I drove a P80D once upon a time, and they have an insane mode right on there, insane. Now, I'm not saying they don't have an eco mode or anything like that. Of course they do. But that's not, you don't hear much about that. Like, really, the insane mode should probably be removed. Do you need to go 0 to 60 in 3 seconds? You probably don't, right? There should probably be a mode that says, if you have a conscience, this is the way you should be driving this car. If you care about the environment, the insane mode, if it were to exist, should come up with a big disclaimer saying you're killing the earth, you're killing us all. Again, if they took the narrative seriously. And since I made this video, I've noticed a number of more advertisements such as the ones I'm referring to, and they're all the same. It's all emphasizing these are all step ups for a lot of people when they buy an EV, right? You're getting into a far more expensive, far more luxurious vehicle. You're not going utilitarian bare bones. And this is as a pretty casual observer, because I don't really watch any television except for the sparse amount of motorsports that we can get here in Canadian television. It's pretty bad. And some YouTube ads, right? Like my wife watches television, so sometimes I'll see something, as I'm walking by, or something like that. But I'm not actively looking for these things. But I've seen a number of more power sliding, drifting around corners, smoking the wheels videos. I noticed the other day, the Ford Mach-E, they've got unbridled mode, right? So this is the same version. Like everybody's on the same bandwagon. You get my point. I would submit to you that if this were really about, environmental awareness, environmental impact, then these manufacturers would make utilitarian vehicles, small, lightweight, not very many frills and gimmicks, sort of bare bones car, like maybe an old Datsun 510 or whatever there was a smaller series in the late 60s, early 70s, 200 series, something like that. This was, kind of like a Lada or, a Trabant, the East German car. Maybe we don't need to go that utilitarian. But that's my point, is they wouldn't be advertising the sheer luxury and the sheer performance. They might even be speaking to their customers and saying the right way to manufacture and to own an EV and take care of our planet is for us not to try to appeal to you, to your consumerism, to your vanity, etc., but to appeal to what we think brought you here in the first place. So this car is limited in its performance. It's going to be roughly on par with a similar internal combustion counterpart. And yes, we've foregone a lot of the heavier materials that would give you some of these added creature comforts, because at this point in time, we all need to pull together. We've all got to do our part. And you wouldn't be shy about saying that the actual range of this vehicle is only 150 or 200 miles, because you would explain that to have a 500 mile range would require an unnecessarily large battery pack, and that is an impact on the environment, both in its production and of course in the application, in the use of the thing. And yeah, it would be a modern day equivalent of something very frugal and simplistic, and especially for most people, in the areas where you can really make the most impact with an EV. Sorry, this hill's a little tough. Where you can make the most impact with an EV would be in large city centers, large urban sprawl, metropolitan area, where people typically, they drive to the mall, they drive to school, they drive to church, they drive to work, they drive to the gym. But none of that is usually outside of, especially in a city, is not outside of, a 75-mile radius. And those are the areas where the urban atmosphere, if you will, the urban air quality could really, really improve if people were driving internal combustion vehicles less, right? And so that's not the way they're advertised. It's not the way they're marketed. And I would argue, even somewhat from watching the way people sometimes drive EVs, that they're not thinking about ecology anymore once they own the thing. And by the way, how do you reconcile this with the ESG score? I mean, after all, the E is the first letter in the acronym, right? And so how do they reconcile that? The unbridled and the insane mode and all of the power drifting commercials, advertising performance. It kind of just shows you, I think, that all of this stuff is all bullshit. I mean, it really is. The claims of net zero and carbon neutral, zero waste, all that. Where's the auditing of any of those claims? In a sane world, if we really thought those things were important, we would audit companies making all these claims. And there would be, investor boards sitting there somewhere pushing back against the automotive manufacturers and saying, this is not what you should be building. This doesn't save the planet, right? And the fact that that's not happening, because they do flex their muscles sometimes with the whole ESG thing, of course, but they don't flex them there, and I think that tells you something. Largely speaking, for a lot of people, they don't really need a new car. We've been doing this for a while now. I watch my own customers do it for over 18 years. A perfectly viable car. One day they show up with something new. We felt like it, And a lot of them regret it, actually. A lot of these vehicles nowadays, they're too complex. And I would submit to you, especially in the harsh environment that a vehicle operates in, humidity, vibration, heat, cold, shocks, potholes and stuff like that, abuse. In some areas, high levels of salt in the mist, sea salt spray and things like that. Complexity is not your friend. As a mechanic, I don't really want anything newer than 2014-ish, roughly, based on my experience servicing vehicles. And I know the vehicles to buy and the vehicles not to buy. Now, a lot may say vehicles are more reliable than they ever have been. Well, not so fast. It depends on what you mean by reliable and how you classify that. And like I said, I don't think complexity is your friend in that regard. And actually, it's the latest crop of EVs that are starting to have some of the poorest reliability ratings. That's kind of unforgivable to me. Engineering is done usually on paper first. They know the properties of different materials. They know the forces involved. They've got past experience of other failures and whatnot to draw upon. And they've got safety margins to work with. But of course, they also have the guy in the back room with the abacus saying, no. We can't use that alloy, or whatever, right? The best car I ever owned, not the nicest, I've got a 1990 Beretta GT that I ordered new from the factory, and I custom fabricated my own supercharger installation kit for it. It's kind of a nice little car. I've got a 350Z, a Nissan 350Z in the garage. Arguably doesn't get out much, doesn't get exercise much, but it's a nice car. Back in the day, I had 65 Impala two-door sport coupe, white on red, white exterior with a red interior. And I built a 375 horse spec 327 for it. I've had big block Chevys. I had a two-door Brookwood 1959 station wagon, which was kind of rare because it was a two-tone green with a white roof and top of the tail fins. Rare because the Brookwood was the lowest model of that lineup, and so they were usually monotone. It was a neat car, again, a two-door wagon. But the best car I've ever owned was probably one of the simplest and generally well engineered. I was trying to build a V6 for performance, and I was looking for a platform to stick it in once it was built to test it. So I was looking for a test bed for this engine. I was working for a dealership, and I was on a road test one day, and I saw this 1986 Cavalier 4-door sitting in front of someone's yard, and it was sitting in the grass with the grass growing up around it and no license plate. So I thought, okay, here's a potential candidate. Who cares if the motor runs? I just need the platform. So I inquired, bought the car for $200. I had it taken back to the shop. I lived about 40 miles away, 40 minutes. And so I wanted to assess this car and see if I could get it running and whatnot so I could drive it home, because that's where I would be doing the motor swap and whatnot. So I went through the car. I got it running. It ran great. Checked the brakes, cooling system, steering, suspension, all the things you would worry about, because I don't want to be broken down on the side of the road on the way home. So I take the thing home, and it drove really good. Like, man, this thing drives kind of nice. For what it is, it's a bare bones car, right? It didn't really have any options to it. The one option it had, similar to the Brookwood, was a little bit rare, is it had air conditioning, but the air conditioning wasn't working. I subsequently fixed that later and enjoyed air conditioning, and it was rusted. The car had rust up the sides, It wasn't particularly appealing, but fortunately it was an extremely dark purple. I thought it was brown for a long time until one day I kind of looked at it and realized there was metal flake in the paint, and the metal flake looked purple. So I buffed out a spot because it was all oxidized, right? It was brown looking with kind of a white oxide film on it. I buffed it out and I'm like, no, this car's purple. Very, very dark purple. Anyway, that hid the rust a little bit. After I got the car home, I thought, I had my Beretta GT at the time and I didn't drive it in the winter. I would be looking for a winter beater anyway. I don't have the motor ready. I'll just drive this car over the winter. And then in the spring, I can put the Beretta back on the road and do my engine swap in the Cavalier. Well, having it for a winter beater ended up being 6 or 7 years of full-time driving. I just kept driving it. It was such a great car. Best car I've ever owned. It literally asked nothing of me. I'm into it for a couple $100 plus fixing the AC and some general maintenance. We used to have a shop night where mechanics would be allowed to work on their own cars for a couple hours after closing. I doubt they do that anymore. And I would put that car up on the hoist. I'd be changing the oil, flushing the brake fluid, and guys would walk past me and they'd say, you service that thing? Of course I do, man. And I wouldn't hesitate to just drive that car across Canada. Like, it was so reliable. Never broke down on me. Never once broke down on me. The only thing I really did to that car was I put a nice Kenwood stereo in it. Because I had a 40-minute commute. And, you couldn't really sport your way to work, right? Like, if I wanted to pass somebody, if I pulled out and, downshifted into fourth or something, if you put your foot down, it just got louder. Like, it didn't really accelerate much. It was quite gutless. So I just sort of got used to just, relaxing, going with the flow of traffic, just hanging out. I mean, you could pass somebody, but you'd have to really anticipate it, drop it down to third, fall way back, and then accelerate up as the last, opposite traffic went by and slingshot past. So I just got used to just taking it easy, put in a nice stereo. I was interested in accurate sound reproduction, not, vibrating the badges on the trunk lid. So I put in a nice tight little 8-inch subwoofer, and I made my own fiberglass enclosures for the front speakers in the kick panels down low by your feet. I was able to engineer them so that both speakers on the passenger and driver side basically aimed pretty much directly at my ears. And I made those enclosures with some 3-inch full range speakers that my brother turned me on to. They're called Hi-Vi, if you're ever interested. I think they're still available. They were dirt cheap and they have a really nice flat frequency response. I have a pair in my truck. I did the same thing with my truck many years later. Put that all in, and then I would just do my do my commute and enjoy the music, you know. But it really was the best car I've ever owned. I would average over 40, get like 40, 42 miles to the gallon, something like that, which, you know, that's nothing wrong with that. And I drove it for many years. And it was probably the best car I've ever owned in terms of, in many metrics, not aesthetics for sure, but in terms of cost per mile, you know, to own the thing, to, you know, purchase, maintenance, fuel economy, all of that. I think it probably, you know, by the time I got it, least impact on the environment possible, just about. It's a frugal, no frills car to begin with. It's good on fuel. It had already given its previous owner something along the lines of 240,000 kilometers of service, and I doubled that easily. And when it was finally time for me to give the car up, I sold it to a young fella who had a Mustang GT that he didn't want to drive in the winter. And he drove it for several winters before I lost track of it. And I, you know, I'm not suggesting that it went a long ways beyond that, but it certainly put in its time. And I would submit to you, especially again when you consider that most of these vehicles, they're not zero emissions, etc., etc. They're not even zero combustion, right? They're just external combustion in most regions. Certainly at this point in time, and probably for the foreseeable future. There's many of these places where you're simply not going to get to all renewable energy sources anytime soon. Sorry, I'm just going to grab the mail. I meant to do that yesterday and I forgot. And you know, there's so much else going on in that. You know, you think about that. You know, when you recognize that these are actually not like zero emissions or zero combustion vehicles, but that they're just external combustion, and there are emissions involved, and we lie about a lot of the emissions, again, such as the rubber emissions and the battery manufacturer emissions and the battery non-recycling emissions, all of that stuff, the emissions of manufacture altogether. And people talk a lot about net zero and carbon neutral and zero waste. And I would submit to you that there's not much auditing going on of this stuff, right? And some of it you don't even need to audit. You just need to listen to the claim being made. There was a claim about Dutch rail being 100% powered by wind, and that's not true. That's an agreement that allows someone to say that, but it's not true. Or at least it certainly wasn't true when the claims were made in 2017. Someone like Elon Musk, of course, he's more in the business of selling carbon offsets to other manufacturers than he is of making electric vehicles, arguably anyway. And the question I would have, you know, again, I don't have to audit the case to see if, you know, this really makes sense. I would just ask the question, well, why? Like, he's not responsible for the purchase or the ownership of these vehicles, or even the government mandates, although I guess he can lobby, which I'm sure he does, and many of them do. I mean, many companies in general just lobby the shit out of government. Try to, you know, that's our democracy, right? They don't lobby the public, right? That's my point. You know, and get us to demand something from our government. But don't let me get sidetracked by democracy here. Oh, maybe we'll go to the old video location here and finish this off. But he's not responsible for the driving of the cars. What he's responsible, and you know, how much they drive and where they go and everything else, he's responsible for their manufacture. So why does he get a credit and another company not get a credit because they're making an internal combustion vehicle? The emissions during manufacture should be what's considered if one is going to get some kind of a carbon credit for that, right? And especially when you consider that the majority of the vehicles that they sell are not zero emissions vehicles. The emissions just happen somewhere else, as I've argued previously. So why does he get that benefit? So there's so many different ways in which this is a really kind of a clusterfuck, right? And I don't think the technology is ready necessarily, and I don't think that everything has been considered thoroughly, especially if you look at cold weather climates. Look what they're doing across Canada with like Proterra, the buses. A lot of these are highly proprietary systems and batteries, and when a company starts going bankrupt, you have to wonder, how are we even going to fix or maintain these buses, which are constantly breaking down as it is? They never meet their projected range that they're sold these buses by. And by that time, they've already spent all the taxpayers' money. Non-technical people on whatever, city councils or whatever, making technical decisions, and it all goes sideways. And this could be done so much better. Again, I'm not anti-electric vehicle. What I see is largely dumb. And again, it's not being carried out in the way that it's being initiated, right? Do the right thing for the environment. And then all of a sudden, look at the power, look at all the convenience, look at the luxury. This is awesome, right? You know, is humankind really ready? I mean, I would submit that to you as well. Is humankind really ready to buckle down? You can have the commercials where two girls sit in a coffee shop. I'm really worried about climate change. No, you're not. You're worried because you've been told to be worried, but you're not really willing to do probably what it would take to actually mitigate it. And neither are the manufacturers, the ESG scores and everything else. It's all about just doing what they need to do to satisfy some requirement so they can sell. So yeah, as I said, I'm not really anti-EV. To me, I see all technological, items as tools. Tools got to be fit for purpose. And I don't think this is fit for purpose if that purpose is to still shuttle ourselves around, but do so responsibly, environmentally and otherwise. And I don't think people are really willing to do what it takes anyway. These things certainly, I think, morph into something that's far beyond the original intent, and people can sort of lie to themselves and just rationalize it to themselves that they're still doing the right thing while they squirt around from, stoplight to stoplight. And, of course, the manufacturers doing the same thing. They're virtue signaling that we're doing all these things for the environment. Meanwhile, it's sort of business as usual. And I'm a free market guy, so I don't mind, I said sell. And I mean, that's the name of the game. However, I do think there's a difference when it comes to free markets versus, the sort of corporatocracy that we have now, the aforementioned lobbying and all these other things that sort of revolving door between a lot of big businesses and government agencies and things like that. I was reminded of a conversation that I had with a fellow recently where we were talking about some current things going on with a very large airplane manufacturing firm, let's say. I don't want to die suddenly or something here by being too critical. That's a joke, by the way. Anyway, and we were talking about that and airlines in general, some of the things that we had seen with airlines themselves. And then we got talking about Formula One racing, and he brought up Niki Lauda. I think there's a biography that he wanted me to look into on Niki Lauda. And I remembered watching, I think it was probably an episode of Mayday, where one of his, because he owned an airline, right? And a small airline, and one of his planes had crashed. And, he took it so personally. I had never seen this before, a CEO of an airline who literally went out to the crash site and personally and took it very seriously and was just, really devastated by what had happened. And I said, no, that's the difference, of course. There's a company that's owned by someone who puts delivering a service and a product first, for people, for actual human beings first, and profit as a secondary or maybe even tertiary or who knows what motive behind him. It's not that he can ignore making money, but that was not the primary motive. And of course, this other very large airplane manufacturer had recently had, some time ago, merged with another company, and that did seem to mark a change in their business philosophy from being an engineering and manufacturing company that took a lot of pride in a quality product to profit first and everything else secondary. And obviously, that kind of market is not one that I'm very pro. So anyway, let me know what you think. I'll leave it there. Thanks for watching.